James is on his way. He's just
Okay.
stuck in traffic.
Okay, it happens. It happens a lot less now than it used to, but it still happens.
Yes, which is great.
Yeah. On my
So when
rare
you're ready,
outings.
when you're ready to call the meeting to order, feel free, Paula.
Okay. We can be patient a few minutes. Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
Bill, you do have my cell number, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Easier.
I'll get into it. I'll find you somehow.
I don't doubt that you will. I don't doubt that you will.
I know some people live down the hall from you. They'll come get you if I need you.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I found it impossible to hide at the Artisan. That's just not a thing to do.
James, I made you a host, co-host.
Don't do that.
Yes.
Don't do that. So James, how are you?
I'm fantastic.
All right.
Oh,
I am fantastic. My daughter was watching it's something today, and lady was on there. She was narrating it, and I said, "Oh, I love her. I used to watch her when I was a kid." And she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Wow, and she's still alive?"
Oh. Oh. Oh yeah, and there it was. Hello, Maria.
Is your daughter still alive, Jim?
Right.
He's like, he's not answering.
I know, right? She's in the
like,
basement.
What in the hell? It was Robin Roberts too, who looks good. You know, still looks
Oh, yeah.
good. She used to do the Sports Center, and I walked by. She was just watching it.
She was the voice of so many things. It was unreal.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the late 90s, my first internet company, we had developed a piece of software, and we needed a voiceover just for numbers.
Okay.
And she did all the Coca-Cola stuff back then. And so one of my partners had worked at Coke and said, "I know just the person." And so every time, if she and I have a conversation, I just giggle because all I can hear is her saying the numbers again. I'm like, wow. There we go. Very distinctive voice. You can pick it out. She used to be the voice at the airport also.
Really?
The little
What?
overhead talkie man. Yeah.
Wow.
Interesting.
Well, she was before she went to ESPN. She was the Atlanta sports broadcaster for WAGA TV. So.
Yeah, it's just interesting stuff. It's like somebody who's been around a long time has a voice that's very noticeable and very distinctive, and yeah, go figure. Uh-oh, I think we lost Bill for a minute. Hopefully
This
he'll come
meeting
back.
is being recorded, just so you all know.
Thank you.
That was
Be
for me.
careful.
Don't say anything.
That was for me. That was Mr. Herndon. This is being recorded.
There's Bill back. I'm in particular curious to have Hans join us because he's a big chunk of tonight's meeting. So that's part of why I'm being patient for a few minutes.
Okay.
And I haven't heard anything from him that indicated he had any change. So I expect him to show up.
Paul, I may have to get off here in about a half hour.
Okay.
If I do, it's some DeKalb County stuff.
Okay.
So if I just disappear, you'll know what it's about.
All right.
Sorry.
It's a good reminder for me to turn mine off. Phone check.
Maria, was Aaron excited about his fourth grade teacher?
He doesn't care about the teacher. One of his bestest buds, like bros, is in the class with him. They play lots of Roblox together. So he was like, yay! He's not, I was like, do you know who Mr. Art is? He was like, yeah, you know, he's 9.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter. Who's in class with me?
Okay.
So what about your people? Are they fans of their teachers, or do they care either?
Hans is joining now.
We got the kindergarten teacher that my daughters have played school as the kindergarten teacher since they were little, and it was probably the most exciting morning in a while. And no interference from Dad. We opened it up, and they did a little dance. It was amazing. And then the fourth grader was like, whatever.
Yep.
All right. Well, we have our other folks. Hello, Phil. Hello, Hans. Thank you for joining us.
Hello,
I believe
everybody.
at this point, we can call this to order and get us going.
Okay.
I have no agenda in front of me. Forgive me. So if anybody's got it handy, somebody tell me first item.
Let's see.
Guess I could go pull it up, huh? Why not?
Let's see.
Any agenda revisions? The next item is agenda revisions and approval.
Thank you. I finally have it. There you go. Do we have any suggestions, any revisions, anything anybody needs changed?
To today's agenda or to
Yes. Yes, today's agenda.
let me
It's a big door to open for you, Hans. I realize that.
let me actually look at the agenda. That might be a good place for us all to start.
It is call to order, agenda revision, minutes, the committee action items, discussing public involvement, setting the date for those future actions, and that is it.
I suspect that's probably general and generic enough for us to cover everything we need to go through with what we're talking about today.
Agree with that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Did everybody have an opportunity to review the minutes? Any suggestions, revisions, updates?
Good.
No.
Do I have a motion to approve as presented?
I'll make the motion to approve as presented, the minutes.
Phil, a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Maria. All in favor of acceptance as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, committee action items. So after our very interesting data tour last time, Heinz is now going to put me to shame. He has, in a good way, he has built a model that I believe, hello, Gwen, that I believe better approximates what we were looking to try to figure out using current data and then projected data. So is there a way, I don't know if I can allow him to, no, okay. I need somebody to let Hans share his screen, please, and let him take us on a.
I'm gonna make you a host, Paula,
Okay,
as well as Hans.
okay, awesome, thank you. So Hans, you have the floor, friend, if you can figure out how to screen share.
As soon as those changes go in effect, it
Okay.
should let me do that. It's still,
Okay, for some reason I cannot get Hans.
there we go.
Okay,
Okay,
All right. So I hope this isn't too much of an eye chart. Is everybody able to see what's on the page? I'll walk through it in detail, but I just want to make sure everybody can read the numbers to start.
yes.
If I bring the screen closer.
Yeah, maybe a little larger.
Okay, let's, Zoom has all this crap in the way of my Excel model. So let me move all these little windows.
You can do it in the bottom right, Hans.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my bottom right is also covered by Zoom.
Oh, sorry. You're on the right place. Just slide gently to the right.
Yeah, go to the right.
There
Keep
we
going.
There you go. All right.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, Yeah, all your faces were right on my model. So let me, we don't have to get into too much of the weeds of how this works, but a couple of points of things to point out before we dive too far into this. First of all, I'm very confident that all of the calculations that this is based on are correct. I have less confidence in the core of the underlying data, right? And so we relied on information provided and then extracted by an individual in the community, and that information is extremely helpful to come up with these calculations, but I would recommend to the board that a proper analysis of the quality of the underlying data be done first, right? So any kind of major data analysis, you need to be doing, all kinds of checksums and data validation and a number of other aspects of data analysis, which I have not done. That exceeds my skill set. So this is an Excel model based upon the presumption that the underlying data is clean. That's, in my experience, a giant presumption. So first recommendation. But presuming that it is at least close enough to clean, that this is going to be directionally correct, let's talk a little bit about what we have here. So what I did is similar to the calculations that Paula had run before, we set the appraised limit on homes at $500,000, meaning that any home below $500,000 is potentially going to receive the exemption. Any home above $500,000 is not going to receive the exemption. And then based upon the other exemptions that are available in the data, we estimated those individuals who are 65 to 69 and those individuals that are 70 and older receiving these exemptions. And so we gave these levers to us to run some calculations on what combination of age, percent of exemption you get, right? So in other words, do you get the full exemption? Do you get a portion of that exemption or a half that exemption? And then what that home value would be. And then running the calculations on that, we can come into an estimate of right here, which is how much would the new S4 exemption cost. We want to get this number to the $1.2 million per the charter. And then it's going to also tell us how many people that currently have the exemption are going to lose the exemption under the new rubric.
May I interrupt you for just a sec?
Yep.
Thank you. I want to make a clarification because one of the sheets that Dr. Duty shared with us recently, that's one of the 4 that's out on the Google Drive, that is entitled Senior Exemption Impact Estimation Updated 10/5/2016. When we talk about that 1.2, and the calculations that was used on this sheet to approximate to that 1.2 actually also removed the current exemptions. So there's $1.5 million in exemptions that then it might be easier if I think I can share my screen for a moment, maybe.
Yeah, let me release and then let
Okay.
you share.
All right, thank you. Share screen 2. Okay. Can everybody see this one? Is it big enough?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And this set of calculations here, where it calculated out the total senior exemption, which would be like your total S4, Hans.
Mm-hmm.
You see that? Then they pulled out the 1.5 that were current exemptions, and that's one piece that's not in your model at the moment. So we're looking really for that number to be closer to this, as opposed to being 1.2. And that assumes also that this was a static number, which we know it isn't, but we can only approximate so much of this.
Well, hold on, Paula, because I read it slightly differently. What I understood was that the total value. So let me first just say, guys, for the record, this is a really terrible analysis. This analysis, I am not sure who was hired or who did the calculations on this analysis, but this specific calculation right here is the reason why this committee exists, and it's the reason why this problem exists. And this is 100% avoidable, right? So this is problematic, and it should not happen again in future analysis. But the calculation here, and I'm going to talk about why it's flawed, but basically it said this is the value of this $142 million is the value of all homes that get senior exemptions in Decatur. And that number was assumed to be the actual value of all homes that could get senior exemptions in Decatur. So no one ever thought to say, well, if we have a bigger exemption, more people might take it.
Right.
And so using that $142 million, they said, look, if everyone got an exemption at the 18.66 mils, what should the total cost of all senior exemptions ever be to the city or to the schools, which is that $2.65 million right below that. But that is also presuming that the 18.66 mils wouldn't change, which it did just this year, which is partially why you see a $6 million loss, which is growing as opposed to something less. So not only did we assume nobody was going to get an additional exemption above who is currently taking it, we also fixed it at a millage rate that has grown. Given those two numbers, the 2.65 million that we expected out of the total loss, they subtracted how much they were currently losing from exemptions to estimate what the incremental cost of the new exemption would be. That's that 1.2 million. So basically, of the 1.4 million, the $1.5 million that everybody was currently getting as an exemption, the S4 would only do another $1.2 million of damage coming out. Look, that's troubling that calculation is what drove the conversation around whether this exemption got released in the first place. It's deep. I find that deeply troubling.
Hans, question.
Yeah.
I understand the concern about the flaw here in this data. What could we do to make it right? If we could do that, or what kind of effort would it take to make the data right?
You mean originally or now?
Well, that is the
that's the $1 million question, right?
Yeah. Can we get a twofer?
Yeah. So originally, if I was doing this analysis, I would have taken a look and said, so first of all, that $142 million is based upon not all homes that are getting senior exemptions. That is exempt. Those are only those individuals that are getting I think it's the GH2 exemption. So it's actually not all exemptions. It's only one of the senior exemptions. I would have taken a look and said, well, what are all the other senior exemptions that are available, and at least cross-reference that so I was getting a larger universe, right? They didn't do that, right? So there's hundreds of properties in Decatur that are getting a senior exemption, but that are not getting the GH2 exemption. The second thing is I would have taken a look at it and said, all right, well, what is the GH2 exemption, right? It's like a $10,000 benefit you have to know about it. You have to go sign up for it. And it is a $10,000 reduction in the appraised value of your home to drive what that tax benefit is. So at the end of the day, it's not a $10,000 tax benefit. It's a couple $100 maybe benefit if you happen to know about it. And so hundreds of people that are eligible for it aren't taking it, right? So those two pieces of information alone would have told me, okay, well, so obviously if I'm going to move from a scenario where somebody is getting a couple $100 benefit only if they happen to know about it to a case where somebody's going to get a thousands and thousands and thousands of dollar benefit that they're automatically signed up for, whether or not they know about it, you know, maybe I need to take a look a little bit harder at the depth of the math to make sure I'm encompassing the entire group of people that might actually get this. So that wasn't done. You know, I don't know what flexibility the board has to go back and look at this, but you're predicating that $1.2 million off of a deeply, I'm going to try not to editorialize too much. Let me just say, there is no chance this would pass snuff in any analysis that I would have taken a look at had I done this.
I don't want to take us off on a veer us off on the path of our mission, but I feel like we should at least make this finding part of what we include in our recommendation, or whatever the outcome is, just so that we make a record of this is what we've uncovered in this process. What are your thoughts on that?
I 100% agree. I 100% agree. I do believe that we are being asked to hit a target based upon a deeply flawed set of assumptions. And you know, one, it's an avoidable mistake, but two, you know, I don't have confidence that we're shooting at the right target based on this analysis.
One of the other pieces it didn't take into consideration also is roughly 20% jump in the number of people taking senior exemptions because of that automatic enrollment. So that was a huge hop. It's almost a 35% increase from 2016 to 2019. So it is a substantial jump in that part of the analysis also. So
yeah,
again.
The two primary drivers in the difference between the estimate that they have in this page and the number that it's costing them today is millage changes and the substantial number of individuals that are taking the exemption that weren't taking the ones that are calculated here. And both of those, just to be clear, both of those are eminently foreseeable issues.
All right. So thank you for that. I wanted to bring that up because in trying to understand where that 1.2 came from, I thought it was important to discuss. Heinz, if you can go back to sharing and go back to the model,
yep.
I'll stop derailing you, I promise.
No. I think that was that's a great sidebar to set the context for this. So yeah, back to this $3.6 million is, basically what Paula calculated in her first model for what the impact would be at a $500,000 at a $500,000 home value. I've gone ahead and taken it out to 2025, doing, you know, kind of the low, medium, high analysis, and you can see what the impact would be in 2025 under, you know, aggressive assumptions or under conservative assumptions. So what we can do with this model is we can change the home value, which is going to move this number. We can also change what % of people at each age increment get it. So for example, we might say, look, maybe people from age 65 to age 70 only get half of the S4. They don't get the full thing. And so we would make that number 50%, and you can see the impact on what it does in terms of the cost. You know, you could do the same thing for people right now. What this is basically saying is if the home value is at 500,000, so everybody above 500,000 does not get the exemption. Anybody below 500,000 from age 65 to age 70, they get half of their exemption. And from 70 on, they get 100% of their exemption. It's still, you know, $1.5 million too expensive for us. And we're still, yeah.
Mr. Bill Floyd, can you change the age?
Unfortunately, Bill, no. Well, so let me say this. If we did a fully blown proper census and counted everybody, yes. But this is driven off of existing exemptions. And the existing exemptions are categorized by age 65 and up, age 70 and up. So I can't, I did everything under the sun to try to figure out a way to work around that. But right now, with the data that we have, it's 65 to 70 and 70 and above.
Okay, thank you.
What I should say, though, just so you have a sense of the proportionality of the entire universe of people that are above age 65, in Decatur, just under 50%, it's like 48% are in that age 65 to age 70, and about 52% are from 70 and above. So it is about half and half in those two buckets. It's not, it's relatively evenly split between those two numbers.
And can I ask you a question? Looking at like possible surprises later on to avoid surprises, what is the possibility or probability of like the fluctuation of these numbers? Is there any probability of it increasing so greatly that it hits us again? What the estimations are on growth of the 65 and 70 populations?
So the proportional demographics are going to stay fairly constant, right? I mean, like actuarial tables for populations of a certain size and the way Decatur comports pretty, comparatively to that. So I don't think we're looking at enormous changes over time. I actually think it's the opposite problem, Maria. I don't necessarily think we're looking at a scenario that if we constrain it to the $1.2 million now, in 5 years, it's going to be 200,000, right? So, I mean, let's go ahead and play with the numbers and start looking at what happens, right? If we bring this down, I think it was 380,000 was the number that got us to where we wanted to be. What you can see is if we have a home limit of that much and we say age 65 to 70 gets half their exemption, we get awfully close to the $1.2 million cap. And what happens in 5 years, even under the aggressive or the conservative scenario, is it starts dropping. And as you might expect, that isn't because the senior population is changing. It's because homes are aging above, or homes are valuing above that $380,000 limit, right? So the home limits that we put on this are going to be a much bigger driver than the senior age distribution in terms of that cost.
Well, and there's another piece to look at, which is how many, that's B14, how many homes currently getting the exemption will lose that exemption. And that gets into the public piece of this, of what's the, how do you spend this in a way that it doesn't come back and whack you in the back of the head.
And let me point this out as well. All of the homes in the 50% category are counted as full homes for the purpose of that count. So what that means is it doesn't matter what I do to this number, that 822 is going to stay the same.
Right.
But in reality, about of the homes that are remaining, another half of them are losing half of the exemption that they get right now. So it's not like you've got 822 homes that are mad, and of the ones that are left, half of them are also mad. Like, that's the way to read that.
I keep driving myself back to the, if this really is only supposed to cost $1.2 million, if our calculation this time is different than the one that was used to derive it, even though it wasn't exactly a great calculation, that's the part that I'm still not clear on. And James, I don't know if you can speak to that. Hans, you seem very clear in the answer to it, but if that's not how it was derived the first time, why would we do it differently this time? That must have been clear as mud. Sorry.
Was that a question for me or for James? I'm sorry.
Actually, it was for either of you.
Is there a reason to do the calculation differently this time? I mean, I think there has to be. Like, we should do the calculation correctly based on the way the demographics and the home values and everything look. Okay. I think that if the issue at hand is that $1.2 million correct, I mean, no, the first calculation was catastrophically incorrect. Either we're saying that the $1.2 million is the bogey that we have to hit, and the justification for it really meant to hit something more like 800,000, or it means that the $1.2 million bogey on that initial calculation was correct. They just did the calculation wrong, and the updated calculation should put us closer into a $3 million range.
Yeah, I feel this sort of answers a question you had. I knew a year ago that the math that got them to 1.2 million, you know, as a citizen Decatur, that the math that got them to 1.2 was messed up. You know, Gwen Hall, who's sitting over there, explained to me why that happened. And so we all knew that. They didn't factor in that everyone was going to take this, that it was much bigger. My understanding is the subject is it was sold as we can afford this because it will be 1.2 million. And then as we look at the senior home exemption, 1.2 million a year is something that works in terms of the budget. And then the task, as we're asking you all, is at 1.2 million, what's the best way to get a bang for the buck for that? And if part of that is, well, you can't get very much bang for the buck, I encourage you all to share that information, or, well, you know, whatever it is moving forward. Obviously, I agree with you, Hans, that it's troubling that the original target of let's help out all seniors, and it's only going to cost us 1.2 million. Here's my math, was bad math. And that is unfortunate. And that's why we're here. That's why this committee exists.
Well, I mean, let's at a minimum make sure that we don't use the same firm or the same individuals to run the analysis in the future, right? I mean, like,
Yeah.
So step one, I think the first recommendation that this group ought to be comfortable voting on is, let's not repeat this.
Yeah.
I think it's also very safe to say you're not going to get much bang for your buck. You're going to reduce the S4 by 80 or so %, and you're going to alienate 500 to 900 households in the doing of it. And so, like, that's got to be sorted out.
I feel a responsibility as an individual, and hopefully we have others on the committee that would agree, or we can debate it, but to share the flawed data, and as a result of that, come up with a recommendation that could very well impact that 1.2 million figure and make it a figure that we think is a more equitable one based on a truer data set. What are your thoughts on that? I know we're constrained by the 1.2 coming from the board, but we got to look at reality. This is not going to be a kind of recommendation that is received favorably overall, but I think I'm feeling compelled to at least sort of set the record straight and what our findings are thus far. What are your thoughts?
Ms. Bill Floyd, can I make a quick suggestion here, and not a suggestion, but a comment? I think you got to understand the political situation that you're in, and that means that there's a number of things that have to happen to do any kind of exemption or no exemption. One is the school board has to vote to do it. The city commission has to vote to do it. The legislature has to accept the recommendation, and then the voters have to do it. If you're not careful with what you present, you're going to end up with a voters package that nobody likes, and it doesn't pass. And if it doesn't pass, what you end up with is no exemption.
Correct.
Not what we've got now, but no exemption. So I think somewhere in this whole conversation, there's got to be a reality discussion about how do you present something that passes and is acceptable to people? Because if you don't, you end up with, and maybe that's where the school board wants this to go, is something that doesn't pass. And then they don't have any exemption. And then you're right back starting over where you were. James, do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir. Of course.
Okay. I mean,
To
it's just,
follow,
the reality is, if it gets too complicated, it gets too cumbersome, it doesn't pass, then you've got nothing. And you've alienated every senior indicator.
well, and I think if that happens, then you would end up with the next year, the legislative delegation passing something more similar to what we have today, which is what we don't want. I mean, if something were to go down one year that the school board wanted, the legislature can do what it wants. They can do what they
Yeah,
want
but Gwen, they
anyway.
didn't want to do it last time. They didn't want to do it last time.
Right.
You know, and they didn't do what we asked them to do last time. They did what they wanted to do. So that could happen this time.
Well, and thankfully we have the sunsets in there that Elena Parent put in, but I kind of on the same political lines that Bill was just mentioning, I have 3 questions. And the first is, you know, when you're making the case to the public, you know, has CSD determined what CSD can afford? Have we determined that, you know, can we make a case that we can only afford $1.2 million? I mean, I think given the current economic climate and the recent budget cuts, CSD can probably make that case, but I think CSD is going to have to make it in order to convince people that this big of a cut is necessary, that we can only afford $1.2 million, and probably need to show our math on that. The next
Gwen,
thing I
could
was
I-
going to ask about is,
Could I add a real quick point to that?
yeah, of course.
James, I think you also need to pay very close attention to the fact that you have been living with it now for 2.5 years at 2 to 4 times as high as you anticipated. And so to say suddenly, I mean, this year, I agree with Gwen, you probably have the ability to make that case, but I would be looking very askance at you saying, well, we couldn't afford it last year when you did, and I couldn't afford it the year before when you did. And so that has to be accounted for when you do the analysis and the justification that Gwen is mentioning.
Yeah, and I agree with, I mean, I think that's one of the times you're going to have to show the math on that, and show, I even looking 3 or 4 years out. I mean, granted, nobody's got a crystal ball, but you know, the market looks good, economy might come back. You know, who knows what's going to happen with property taxes next year, to be honest. But
Yeah.
I know on the city side, we're very concerned about seeing property tax revenues drop off significantly in 2021. But then I mean, I agree, Hans, with what you're saying. I think that you've got to be able to make your case and paint the picture. And I have very strong feelings about the fact that the numbers were or the analysis was what it was in 2015, 2016. But also, I think, I mean, to me, that's in the past. You spend too much time regurgitating and talking about what happened in the past. It clouds what you're trying to do today. And the need to say, you know, here are the problems that we've had with $1.2 million, even leading up to now. Here's where we've had to, some things that if they had truly been $1.2 million instead of, you know, $5 million, here's some things that we could have done, some services that we could have provided. You know, these are things that we need to do. And then my second thing was, I'm wondering if we need to address the kind of unspoken but implied quid pro quo of, you know, hey, everybody vote and approve this bond. And oh, by the way, the same or the next year, we're going to do this homestead exemption, so the seniors won't really be impacted by the bond payment, which is true. And I'm looking at an email from Dr. Duty from June, where he indicated that right now a house appraised at $500,000 would basically be paying $435 a year for that bond. But I don't know if that's something that we should consider, if there's some kind of low threshold homestead exemption we should think about for all seniors, so that nobody can say that we are breaking that implied covenant. And then the third thing is we talked about the legislative delegation during our last call, and I'm wondering if there have been any conversations with them about what CSD is looking at right now, and about the targeted 1.2 million, and if so, what the responses to that have been, because as Mayor Floyd indicated, and I'm sorry, you're always Mayor Floyd to me. It doesn't matter. The school board can vote and approve what we're talking about right now, but the legislature can come in and say, no, not good enough. We're going to do something different. So, I mean, they have to have buy-in on this.
So, Gwen, that was a super interesting observation around the cost of the bond and what that might look like. So if you can see what I just did very quickly to the model, $10 million, basically there's no home indicator that's worth $10 million. So putting that value in there basically means everyone gets it, right? Like, so this now covers every home indicator. If we, just for consideration's sake, says instead of 100%, everybody gets 20%, that gets us to that 1.2 number. And that 20% almost certainly is going to cover the $400 odd on the average home that the actual bond costs. So this would be a way to accommodate this would be a way to mathematically accommodate an equivalence to what you mentioned regarding just saying, hey, look, all seniors are exempted from the bond payment, for example.
Is there a way to see, though, what the impact of a say a $10,000 exemption for all homes would be layered with what you had done before with a $500,000 break point with the 50 and 100%, just to kind of see, because we certainly want to, one of the goals is to make sure that we're protecting our lower income residents. And so if you reduce the exemption to 20% for everybody, then we're not meeting that goal. What you had up there before, I think, theoretically meets that goal. And certainly if you put, to your point about, the assessed values are going to increase over time, if you put an inflationary index on there, that would help, that would help protect them further, so that you're not just stuck at 500,000 as the index, but maybe it's 500,000 the first year and 510,000 the next year, and so on and so forth, so that people are, once they're under it, they kind of stay under it as their property increases. But if you did that, and then in combination with another exemption that was like a $5,000, $10,000, some level there for everybody, I'm wondering what that might look like.
So in effect, if we kept, I forget which one it is, Paula, it's the, hold on, actually.
The current one, right?
Bear with me. Let me actually go in and look at which of the ones it was. Yeah, the GH2, I think, is the one.
Okay.
I don't have the list in front of me. The GH2 was 65 and older schools, and the S3, I think, was 70 and older. But I have to look at the exemption list to try to remember. But basically, if we kept the GH2 in place, and then what's left? if we just.
But the GH2 doesn't have anything to do with the school tax.
But I could translate the impact of the GH2 to what it would look like if it was applied to the school tax, right?
Okay.
I mean, the millage calculation would be straightforward. Well, it's safe to say I'm not going to be able to do that change just live in front of you today. Sorry to disappoint, but yeah, I could try to run a piece of analysis like that and see what that would look like.
Or alternatively, if you did like and I don't even know if the legislators would go for this, but if you did a $500 homestead exemption for all seniors, or $1,000 homestead exemption. So instead of an exemption from the assessed value, if you just gave a flat dollar amount exemption to everybody, what the impact of that would be on top of it, and you could then the marketing of that would be, this is in acknowledgement of the fact that seniors are paying for the bond, and there's I mean, you hate to use quid pro quo, and you hate that there sort of was one, but
can you tie it to can you
keep that down but also cover the amount?
Yeah, if it I mean, this may not be this may actually just make it worse of a quid pro quo, but if you tied it to a particular millage, right? If you linked it to a certain, you said, hey, in this year, this is the millage, and as the digest changes or as whatever it is changes, that that number will fluctuate with it. And that might be a way to, instead of just a flat 500, although, actually.
Does the millage rate change on the bond?
No, now I'm thinking about it. It's
No.
It will, right? The payment doesn't change on the bond, but what happens? Yeah, what happens to the digest is going to influence that millage necessary to cover that payment, right? That is how it works. You're not gonna like change the terms of the note to either speed up payment or slow down payment. So you're going to have fixed payments every year, and the millage is going to adapt to whatever. Yeah. So it's actually never mind. Your idea is a better one, Glenn. It's whatever that fixed dollar amount ought to be. That's what we ought to use, and it actually probably should be a.
Wait, how many senior
%
homesteads are there right now?
Look in 7I in the spreadsheet.
Okay, so you're looking at
7I.
that times
No. Go
1,000.
back. Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry.
Yeah. I7,
1300.
whatever. I7, sorry. I'm saying it completely backward, but yeah.
Wait, Gwen, was your
1391.
question what was the number of exemptions available to seniors, or what is the household count that get
No,
exemptions?
I was just wondering, say if you gave all seniors just a straight up $500 homestead exemption, what the cost of that would be. And so that would be your 1391 times
500.
500, which would be a chunk of change.
Well, let me say before I got to go here in a minute, but
Not much.
First of all, seniors,
Not bad.
we're seniors are not what we used to be, and at 65, I don't consider myself a senior. So I don't think anybody I don't know anybody in my age group that quit at 65 or retired. Nobody did.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody at age 65 ought to get a school tax exemption. I think the age needs to be at least 70. Now that's just my opinion, and that's a senior living in Decatur, and it ought to be phased in up after that. But I don't think you need to be worried about whether somebody at age 65 gets an exemption or not. If you get an income exemption, that's one thing, but nobody at age 65 ought to get a blanket exemption. Age ought to be at least 70.
I will say that Mayor Wilson agreed with you in our 2 talks. Bill.
That may be where I got it from, but
That's really helpful and kind. And I guess if you think, well, I was going to say everybody who was a senior when it was voted on 5 years ago is now 70 at least.
Right.
It's a good way to get through the politics. So that gives us a home value of 425 if we choose to use the home value as the limit.
I want to hammer back for just a minute on Gwen's first question about how can, if we look at 2019 and assume that this exemption costs $6 million, how do we dial it all? It hasn't cost 1.2 million ever. If you look at line 8, right? So I'm still hung there. I don't even, if you've been clipping off, even in 2016, it was still $3 million. I don't know how you reduce this back. The digest is going up and the number of people went up. So how do you justify that 1.2 million?
Well, so the right way to read this is the exemption wasn't in place in 2016. So these calculations are only as if it were in place.
Fair enough. Thank you.
So the 2016 number that was there was 1.4 million. And so the actual cost would have been, the actual incremental cost would have been about 1.6 going into 2017. You know, what's shocking and what I think is missed in the calculation is if you want us to hold it at the year that the calculation was done was 2016. And the right number in 2016 would have been on the order of 1.6 had the calculation been done correctly. And had everything else in the world frozen at that moment, like no growth in the digest value, no growth in individuals entering 65 and above ranks, no anything else. And that's what's killing us as you go forward. I mean, it's doubled in 3 years.
To the point you just made about 2016 being actually 1.6, I'm wondering if we should be considering the excess between, so is the actual cost of S4 the whole cost of the exemption, or is it just the cost of the S4 above what the cost would have been of the exemptions that were already in place at that time? Because
thank you for asking that. You did a much better job of asking that question, which I tried to ask at the beginning of the meeting. So thank you.
So it clearly ought to be the latter, right? Like it ought to be that incremental cost. And so if you look at the slide or the image that Paula had, what we ought to do is we ought to take what was the growth and the baseline exemption, which was that 1.4 million, I think. That 1.4 million is going to grow at the same rate that all of these other numbers have grown, right? So if we do, hold on, this is dangerous. I'm going to do Excel calculations live. So talk amongst yourselves while I do a couple things here really quickly.
But even as you do those, the millage rate has gone up in response to the S4.
The millage rate only went up last year, though.
Okay.
It didn't change before then, to my understanding, and it was because a new school was opening. And I mean, I remember being told when I talked to some folks about this at the school board, or back in 2017, that there was an expectation that they would increase the millage when Tally opened.
Correct.
But what I'm thinking is, instead of this cost us $6 million, that we have to explain how we lived without that $6 million, it might be more like it cost us $4 million, and this is how we live without that $4 million, which is a little bit more digestible.
And I get that, and the suggestions are all good. I'm very interested in what the suggestion is, and I think that if the committee can kind of stay on track in terms of the best suggestion for that 1.2 million and the way to use it, it can be scaled up. It can be done. I was interested in hearing your thoughts on, at that 380, what are the number of senior households that do receive stuff? I had heard feedback from both a member of the committee and from a conversation with the DeKalb delegation that they are interested in us talking about an income-focused exemption. They think that has a lot of appeal indicator.
Do they mean income like people below a certain income, or are they interested in the assessed value approach?
They told me that, well, never mind. I'm giggling at an anecdote that Paula shared with me. Sorry about that. My brain is going to set. They were interested in, they had read through the report and found the impact was like the charge of the committee, because I took to heart our conversation about sharing. It was like, this is what we're aiming to do. And she said, if the goal is the number of households, if it is, what is a senior's income at 70, and a targeted senior exemption that says if you're struggling and this is targeted towards you. So while I didn't get into the weeds, Gwen, I think the answer to your question is, what sort of income did that household have in terms of gross adjusted income?
Federal adjusted, yes.
So I'm going to make a very strong case based on this very, very back of the envelope calculation that I just ran, that if we say that it's 70 and above and not 65 and above, just keep it at 100%. Because if we say the exemption, the non-S4,
Right.
what the seniors were getting before was 1.4. And I think that was what in the numbers were that you were showing us, Paula.
It's 1495, so it's more like 15.
All right. I'm not going to change these calculations. It's fine.
It's fine.
It's close. It's
Fine.
close. Right.
Yeah.
So if it was about 1.4, the digest has been growing at 27% per annum. Right. And so that means that in 2019, it would have been costing $2.8 million. Right. So putting the 1.2 on top of that 2.8 would give us $4 million to play in. If you basically max out the digest, but eliminate 65 to 70 and give 100% to everyone over age 70, you still have room to play. You could do 20%. See where we go. Like you could get up to about, you could even offer 30% to the folks that are 65 and then 100% to the folks that are 70 and still fit within your cap. And that's to the entire population of seniors in Decatur. This becomes a very different justification. But what that means, James, is that your S4 calculation is based upon the net of your S4 and what exemptions you are already having in place, meaning that the incremental 1.2 is on top of whatever the native growth was going to be in the population of individuals that were taking other exemptions.
And what that also translates to, if we look at it, even if you take the 30% on it, it's just 70 and above gets this break. Then I think I recall you saying roughly 52% of this population in 2019 was 70 and above. Is that correct, Hans?
Yeah, something on the order of half, just approximately
Roughly
half. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's approximately half. I'm going to have to go and I didn't build the calculation to run the housing numbers if I have a value in here. So, you know, it's not showing up, but it's roughly half, right? So you would have of the, you know, 1391, you'd have about 700 homes that didn't get the exemption that are getting it now, but who will get that exemption in a couple of years in full.
Well, what's compelling to me about this, the new calculation, is if you look at 2019, instead of saying we're taking $5 million back, you know, we have to reduce the homestead exemption by $5 million, we're reducing the homestead exemption by $2.1 million. And it's, I think, a lot easier to explain, you know, this is, I just think that's a much more palatable sell.
The way to, I think, James, the way to say it is that your $1.2 million was not the estimated cost of the S4. It was the estimated incremental cost of the S4. And it was an incorrect calculation, but it was always the incremental cost of the S4, not the aggregate cost of the S4. The aggregate cost of the S4 was the 1.4 plus the 1.2. And so the growth of that number to 2019 would give you a $4 million bucket to play in here.
I want people to be able to ask questions of this. I have kind of like 3 directions that I want the conversation to go from here, if that's okay. One, I love this. If you change the calculations, then it's not just at 70 that becomes the only fix. So I would like the committee to discuss sort of like, while 70 is a fix, you know, changing the income is a fix, changing the household plus 70, you know, like their other options become more, Gwen, I think you said the word palatable. Agreed.
Can we put forward a couple recommendations on that front? Or that's where I think Gwen's suggestion of maintaining either a $10,000 exemption or a flat fee exemption. In fact, if we were to do, hold on, I know I'm all over the place here, but if we were to say everybody gets the $500 exemption, and people above 70 get 100% exemption, you're still under your 400. And this is an overestimate because in this 695, I also have people that are above 70, but roughly you're still under your $4 million limit. So if we do somehow everyone gets exempted from the equivalent of the bond, and then anyone above 70 gets exempted from it 100%.
Yeah.
We still fall within the mathematical limits of that increment.
We're expecting some sort of report in September, as well as a discussion of how we want to go public with this. I think that for our points of discussing it, and Gwen, your three are exactly how we've outlined moving forward with it. If it includes, if you just are insistent on this 1.2 million, this is the way to go. Here's our math why that's probably not the way to go. This is why that only impacts so many people, and here's why you should probably change your mind. And then here are some options if you want to go with Hans's things that suggest that given the growth and the change and the increases, options 1, 2, and 3, or just one, whatever you all want to go. I think that is a totally acceptable version of a September presentation of how we should move forward.
And two comments on that. One is just for whatever it's worth, I don't think I've ever actually seen a homestead exemption bill in the legislature for just $500 off of a property tax bill.
Sure.
But the other thing is to say, I think Hans is absolutely correct. If the value of the S2 in 2016 was $1.4 million, the school board's goal of doing this 100% homestead exemption was not to reduce the current homestead exemption amount. It was to increase the current homestead exemption amount. So there is no way that they thought that the impact of the S4 would only be $1.2 million. Because that would be less than what was already on the books. It just doesn't make sense. And so to me, logically, it has to be that they thought that it was going to be an additional 1.2 over what they currently had, which would be, your 3.6 then and your 4 million now.
To be clear, it really ought to be an incremental 1.6 with an inflation of about 20%, 27% per year since 2016. So even what Gwen just described is way constraining, but yes, it's certainly a lot closer than a flat 1.2 now. The other way to say it, and I think, Gwen, you said this, a flat 1.2 now would actually be a much worse exemption than what was just in place already. We should have just not had an exemption change in 2016 and let the one go forward that was there, because it would be better.
I have a question. What's better to take whatever the amount is that's going to be whatever the amount is that we're working with, is it better to take that amount and to spread it over a population where you're covering more beneficiaries with a smaller amount of benefit, or is it better to give a greater amount and touch fewer families and lives?
My opinion is that we need to help the people who need help, and that was the point of this homestead exemption in the first place. So I would say you do more for fewer. But
Okay.
I also wonder if you have to do a little bit for everybody because of that bond referendum.
Well, technically, that sounds like two different exemptions, not trying to make a complicated one, right?
Yes, that I agree with. I think that you have to have something between 65 and 70 that ensures the individuals that need the exemption get it, right? And this is to Bill's point about you know nobody is not working until 70, right? But the folks that really need it under the age of 70, we should have something in place, either the fixed reduction that Gwen had mentioned, or just revert back to the old GH2 for that age range so that individuals that need it have it. And then 70 and above, you can do the full thing. You can even take the 65, what actually probably the right thing to do is take the old 65 and up exemption and correct it for current home values. So since a $10,000 exemption is basically meaningless on current home values, adjust it so that it's actually a reasonable exemption for current home values and leave the rest for 70 and above. You have the space for it. What would, I mean, I don't know what an inflation adjusted, the $10,000 exemption was put in place in what, like 86?
85.
85?
Yeah.
Right. So what's the inflation adjusted $10,000? I mean, it'd be like $60,000 today. Give it a $60,000 number. And James, I'm going by CPI, not by home values in Decatur, because otherwise it would be the $10 million
Well, I mean,
value.
3% every year, even basically.
It's only 24,000. That 10,000 becomes 24.
In what
From
index?
1985 to 2020. I'm using the U.S. inflation calculator.
But is that CPI or
No.
is that?
That's inflation. That's not CPI.
That doesn't sound right.
That seemed really low.
Yeah, that sounds really low.
Numbers all
But I
look-
mean, like
Okay.
so there is a methodology of analysis that would allow us to come up with an appropriate adjusted home value for a 65 and to 70 exemption that would ensure the individuals that need it get it. It's not going to be terribly expensive. I can't tell you what it is right now, but we could run the calculations. It's going to be on the order of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then a 70 and above 100%, which keeps the folks that were given the promise in the first place happy. And it gives the folks that lose it, a relatively short window until they get it back.
Do any of you have experience with what it, I've never even heard of an exemption. It's clear that none of these on the Decatur books have been updated in a long time. I don't know what it takes to actually update one of those. Is the process similar to what the process is that school board has to approve, city commission has to approve, legislature has to approve, and then the voters have to approve? Or is there a shortened version of that?
I mean, aren't we in effect saying that we need to do two exemptions? Well, like basically we're saying this isn't a single exemption fix. We're actually saying in order to fix this, you need two exemptions.
Well, and I think I heard you a minute ago say modify the GH2 to a number that's somewhat more, I mean, we could clearly figure out what the digest has changed from 1986 to 2020. I mean, that would not be difficult, but to try to understand what was $10,000, it was meaningful in that year, what's meaningful in this year. Or you leave the GH2 as it is and you create two different, the S4 splits and there becomes a 65-year-old version and then there's a 70-year-old version, 70 and over.
So the I mean, I keep saying GH2, but that doesn't actually apply to the school fund, right?
That's correct.
So yeah, we would need to do something like the GH2.
Okay, thank you.
That applied to the school fund and had an adjustment of whatever the amount was to actually reflect human reality.
Right.
Well, actually, in effect, it's the S1, right? Did this get wiped out by the S4?
No, because they're still, hang on, because this one, the S1 is 62 or older, and income of person and spouse can't exceed $10,000, excluding retirement income. So basically, it's you think of it as Georgia state tax, not federal tax.
Yeah, yeah. So in reality, we're talking about a new exemption that takes the bits and pieces of the other exemptions, adjusts it for the correct home value, and applies to 65 to 70.
In the
So the S1 is the $10,000 one for
Correct.
people who are at least 62, and their income is not more than $10,000.
Yeah.
correct.
The S2 though, I think is for people who are 80 and older,
Yes, and their
and their
federal.
income doesn't exceed 40,000. So I just mentioned that to say if this 1.4 million that we were talking about before is based on the S2, that may not be the figure that we are looking for.
I don't think the S2 was included in any of this part.
Okay, so Hans, that 1.4 under 2016, was that the S1?
Paula, can you throw the thing back up on the screen? Because I don't have it in front
Yeah,
of me.
what am I looking for? I'm sorry, I drifted. I was looking for something on my desk.
What did when they said that the total cost of exemptions in Decatur were this?
Oh, okay.
What
Yeah,
were they?
not a
What was
problem.
what exemption were they basing it on?
Not a problem. Hang on.
I just want to make sure, since we're talking about how the S4, replaced kind of, but was the 1.2 was meant to be in addition to what was already on the books, what the actual thing was that we're saying was already on the books that was that 1.4.
Give me a sec. Sorry. Thank you, Hans. All right. I think I'm sharing now. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Okay. So all this sheet said was current exemptions that it was the cab tax record. Apparently,
Okay.
of all these people, anybody taking any kind of senior exemption, this 1.495 was the current amount.
Okay.
Okay.
For the schools.
Yes.
Okay. All right, cool. So we've just kind of been calling it S2, but that's probably not the correct vernacular.
Yeah,
Well-
it would be. I think it's probably the aggregate of all of them.
Okay. So
Well,
just the pre-2007, the pre-S4 exemptions added up to that collectively.
Well, and to help frame this even further, in the 2019 second billing digest, there were only 4 homes that qualified for the S2.
Right. Okay.
It's a very, and understandably so, it's a very small universe, in part because of that income limit.
Right.
And age and income. Yep.
Right. 80 and, right. Yeah. So,
But I think the long and short of what we were more or less, I think, coming to a conclusion on here is if we are going to have something that addresses 65 to 70 structured for the proper home value, and we can have a conversation about income per the requests from the commission or the delegation, that's a new exemption. And then the adjustment on the S4 is also a new exemption, right? I mean, so we actually, I think that it sounds like we're starting to develop a consensus around it. It's probably 2 exemptions that we're talking about to fix this. We may not have the details worked out fully on that. I can run some more analysis, but what do y'all think? What's y'all's reaction to that?
James, do you think that they would say there's any way they would say yes to that, or would they say that's outside of your scope of what you're charged to do? Would they agree that we need to have the other one fixed? to make one that's correct. I always want to know, what would Dad say? How far will I get on this?
I have no idea.
I think you have to look at them holistically, though.
Yeah.
I agree.
And especially, and I also think it's compelling that the legislators told you they wanted you to look at something that was income-based.
Yep.
A legislature, but yes.
Okay.
Look, I'm a giant fan of asking for forgiveness rather than permission. I think we make a recommendation and then say,
See what they say.
what? Me?
It works.
If we do include an income limitation, I would very much like for us to at least consider tagging it to AMI, like a 2-person AMI, so that it ratchets up over time, as opposed to like some of these exemptions that are just ridiculous and nobody can qualify for them anymore.
Yep.
And that's not a number we have to calculate. That's thankfully done for us.
Yes, I like that.
And I also think it would be important that we ask for another 5-year sunset so that we have the opportunity to reevaluate.
That's in the charge.
I think this has been some great progress today, guys. I went into this meeting pretty unsure we were going to arrive at a good answer. I actually feel like we're arriving at a pretty good answer.
I also think we're arriving at an answer that works to protect those people that are the most vulnerable from an income perspective, and for the folks who have lived here for a long time who we want to keep. So,
and that the school can actually sell and get supported,
right,
at least somewhat from the community, and
right,
doesn't enrage the delegation, which is something we have to consider, right? I mean, and you can build a reasonable communication plan around it.
So we need a presentation in September about your, as a committee's thoughts. And from what I'm hearing from you all is, you know, if we were to go 1.2 million, it would be this, and it would impact this many people. And then we think you should consider X. Here's why. The next thing we would like your feedback on is public involvement moving forward, how you all envision letting them know. And that, I believe that can be, given the circumstances, probably post-September, sort of what was discussed, what we're considering, that sort of stuff. And then what role can I play in organizing? And you all can do that offline, off of Zoom, if you all want to talk separately and putting those sort of plans and discussions together in terms of which of the levers is best.
James, do you mind? I'm gonna push back on the first suggestion that you made.
Okay.
I don't think we should put analysis forward fixing it and holding it at 1.2. I think we need to operate under the assumption that it is not your intent to actually have made a worse exemption than the one that was already in place. And so I don't even want to put that analysis forward. I think what we say is your exemption was to hold it to the increment that you calculated. Even though it was an incorrect calculation on the increment, it was an incremental calculation. And so we'll run it off the incremental calculation. We can have an argument about what the right inflation numbers are for the baseline exemption, but I don't want to put a $1.2 million analysis forward, because that's not actually how you justified it in the first place, right? Like you never were saying that it was going to cost 1.2. You were saying it was going to cost an incremental 1.2.
I can support that.
I just think it opens you up to have a lot of really pissed off people at you for no real reason.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can you explain to me more for my notes why it's not 1.2 on top of the exemptions that existed as opposed to, I heard you and I was kind of lost there. How is it a worse exemption?
It is what it is. No. I'm saying that I think your intent was that it is an incremental 1.2. You had 1.4 or 1.5 million of exemptions, and you
Agreed.
assumed S4 was going to cost you an incremental 1.2 on top of that. And I'm
Agreed.
saying what we should do is put that analysis forward, not taking the whole kit and caboodle down to 1.2, which is actually worse than the 1.5 that you had. That's what I'm saying.
Okay. What analysis do you think was asking the, take the whole kit and caboodle down to 0? I guess that's what I'm missing.
I don't think that you need to explain why we're looking at, the numbers are not there anymore, but why we're looking at a total of 4 million as opposed to a total of 1.2 million.
Right.
I think that should just be stated as fact that we were already at 1.4 million. The intention was to add 1.2 million, but we way overshot it. If we're looking at, here's what was in place with 1.4. So if you work off the assumption that what was in place then is still in place, which it is, it's just meaningless right now. So now you look at the increased value of everything that was already in place then, and you want to add 1.2 million to that. So that's the number you're looking for now, which is your 4 million. Am I explaining that correctly?
Yes. Right. So this is your one. Let's just make the number. You said it was 1495.
Yeah.
This is what your exemptions were costing you in 2016, and you wanted to add 1.2 to that. That 1.4 would have been 1.9. It would have been 2.4, and it would have been 3 in 2019. So we want to add 1.2 to this 3. That's what your charge has been. Instead, it's costing you 6, right? Like it's 6.2. So we're pulling $1.8 million out of it or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you want to get it to 4.2 as opposed to 6.2.
Or as opposed to 1.2. You're not trying to knock it down to 1.2. You're trying to knock it down to 4.2.
Exactly.
I'm all in with you. That 1.5 from 2016, that's 3 million in 2019. So Gwen said getting rid of the whole kit and caboodle. This is just educational for me now.
Sorry, I'm pointing at kids to get out of the room before they interrupt a meeting. I apologize. I'm not directing traffic.
Exactly.
You're great. You're great. I was looking at Phil's beautiful face and pointing at Excel when you said that. So I have no idea what you're talking about. Where's that going? Isn't that still around?
It is.
No,
It's in. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, technically those exemptions are still on the books.
Okay.
But they're meaningless for the most part at this point because of the 100% homestead exemption.
Right.
So you don't need, I guess the people who are age 62 through 64, they're still getting something. But anybody who's over 65, their homestead exemption is wrapped up in the 100% homestead exemption. And I don't know to that point though if there's a way to calculate how many people age 62, 63, and 64 are getting these lower end exemptions.
I think Paul actually has those numbers.
Yeah, like I shared a few minutes ago, for the S2, there in 2019 second billing, there were 4 households taking that exemption.
Well, that was the 80 and above that you said. What Gwen was asking is how many people that are in that exemption that is 62 and above are between 62 and 64. And I don't actually think we could pull that information from the data. I don't think that exists. You can pull out the whole number, but I don't think you can pull out parts. Like I did 20 ways to Sunday to try to figure out how to put more resolution between these two categories and just couldn't, because they're not complete. That information isn't broken down demographically that way in the data.
I mean, because you're looking at, the people
Gotcha.
ages 62 to 64 in the GS1 and people ages 62 to 64 in the S1. The S1's
Okay.
a pretty minuscule exemption. I can't imagine there are that many people that,
Okay.
well, it's just only $10,000. It's just not that much.
There
I'm
were
with you.
27 households taking that one.
Thank you.
You're
All right,
welcome.
I'm on board now.
And then
So-
what about the GS1? How many households were taking that?
The S1, 320.
The GS1 had 320 and the S1 had 27.
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, if you want perfect math, you got to subtract those people.
Right.
Like, I mean, there is still an impact from that when you add it to the S4 gives you the 6.1
Mm-hmm.
that we have right now. I mean, I'm not going to try to figure out what the math on that is, right? I mean, somebody could probably do it, but.
You're fine.
Well, and the challenge is that those other exemptions too, if I'm not mistaken, also have income numbers in it, right? And so it's actually,
One does, yeah.
it's difficult to pull that out.
Right. Well, yeah, but I mean, I'm saying if there are 37 people who took 307 people who took the GS1,
Right.
then those people are people who are 62, 63, 64, and had less than $25,000 in total household income.
But not all of them, right? Like there are a subset of that group of people that are 62 to 64, but there are numbers of them that are above that. Do you see what I'm saying? Like that's where I can't tell what percentage. I guess I could run a.
But why would they take it if they got, I guess they would take it for general city, but they wouldn't be able to take it for school. So yeah, that one you really can't figure out. The other one is the better bet.
The other problem, and I do appreciate you pointing this out, but it's not. I can definitely assert that the underlying data isn't that clear, right? Like
Right.
there are errors when we start getting into the numbers like 20 houses. There's definitely errors in that data at that level, right? And there's just no way it's clean enough to be able to say, hey, this group gets subtracted and this group stays. I mean, there are people. There are a number of people who are over aged 70 in the data purportedly that are not taking the S4 and instead are only taking like the S3.
That's crazy.
No, well, it's probably an error is my point, right? Like
Right.
it probably isn't right. And so that I get really nervous when we start talking about that small of a data set. What I could do, this would probably be a more accurate assessment, is I could say, well, we roughly know the age demographics indicator, and I could do an actuarial run on what percent of the amount is probably 62 to 64 versus 65 and above, and subtract some estimated amount from it. But if what you want is a perfect exact answer in the data, it's not going to happen. It doesn't exist. And so we're going to have to run a couple estimates around it, that's just a very complex way of telling you, James, that if your number is 1.2, you better be happy with 1.1 to 1.6, right? Like it's going to be in that range.
I'm going to do that. Okay.
So James, question: Are you sort of clear as on that point in terms of making it the incremental 1.6?
Yeah, I am clear. Yes, I'm 100% clear, Phil. The charge says to do this. So if this were a group project, I'd be like, who wants to take on the first step of this report, which is can't really meet part one of the rubric teach, and here's the data why. You know, that's the only place where I am. But I now fully understand exactly what we're talking about. My head I'm caught up.
And we're okay. I mean, as a committee, everybody's in support of doing that. And should I have said 1.2 instead of 1.6? Or is it 1.6?
No, it's 1.2. I was
1.2.
just, I was laying the groundwork for the numbers going to not be precise enough to hit exactly 1.2. It'll have a boundary around it.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And we'll just do that as a statement of fact without having to justify it or explain it, correct?
If you say so, Phil.
I mean, I like that approach. I mean, that way you just kind of state it and move on. And if we're questioned on it, you know, we'll answer the question as to why. But
I mean, I'm happy to put a slide together that justifies why, like shows in numbers and justifies why. This is, I do think this is an example of where sometimes more information can be harmful. And I think a little bit of saying, hey, you guys justified an incremental 1.2, so we ran a calculus on what the exemptions would have been in 2019 and added an incremental 1.2 to that, and there you go. Like that, I feel is like a lot easier than trying to show them your math, because if you do that, then
yeah, I agree.
The substantial increase in people taking the exemption after that calculation was done in 2016 is also factoring into this, why that number keeps ratcheting up. I mean, there's no way to, yeah.
That's another reason why I don't want to show the math. It sort of sidesteps the black eye that the analysis otherwise implies. Right. I mean, it's a way of saying, hey, and look, we're factoring in the growth of all the people that are taking it. So it's the incremental 1.2 on top of the, yeah.
Okay. So Hans, yes, thank you for the offer, and please do create something that we can all.
Well, I just said I thought it was a bad idea to do a slide. Are you suggesting that I do one? What
No,
I signed up for?
No, what you just explained though. Right? We
okay. Yeah. I can do that.
Don't make your Excel sheet all sexy and show that. No, just sometimes words are better than anything. Like, here's what we did.
Are you implying that it isn't already sexy, Paula?
Actually, you know, I've already bowed down to you. I have. I'm like, oh my God. I read some of those formulas. I don't even know what the hell they do. I have no clue. So again, you're a ninja compared to me. So I'm grateful for that.
Thank you. That's there are people that I am sure are in the community will look at this and laugh. So there's always people that know how to do it better.
All right.
Okay, I'll try to put something together that looks that you know, basically a one slide that says, hey, this is what we said we would do, and this is the bogey that we want the number to be when we're done, and it'll look like this 4 million right here. It'll have there will be no decimal places, and it will be rounded off to like the nearest 100,000.
There you go. So what I'm taking away from this at the moment is a new exemption somewhat similar to the GH2 that applies to school tax, that is tied to a 2-person AMI income limit, and that's to handle the 65 to 69-year-olds. And then 70 is just a straight, there is no income, just straight 100%. And at least we take care of, we think anyway, the folks that, again, are vulnerable and the ones who've been with us a long time. Is that what I'm taking away from this discussion tonight?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
I can agree, yes.
Do we need to do like a vote on that, or is that just like a nod around the table? Everybody says yes.
I'm not great with Robert's rules. I think they're kind of boring. So I would say I see faces. I don't see anybody shaking their head.
Let's do a vote, Paula.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat it one more time?
Sure.
Exactly.
Create a new, so to handle people 65 to 69, we create a new exemption that is modeled much like the current GH2 that applies to school tax and is tied to a 2-person AMI income limit, and that would be federally adjusted income. Can I get a motion to approve that one as the first of a preliminary recommendation? Because we're going to have to clean these up.
I so move.
Very good. Second?
But we don't have our income limit for that right now. Or and we're talking about increasing it beyond 10,000.
Yes,
It
I
would
think
have
so.
to be.
Yeah.
That 10,000, I think, is really an old, sort of obsolete figure. It would have to be something based in realist, updated
so
to today's.
I think
Do we have an estimated cost that we want for that?
You mean, what is it going to cost us to do that?
And I mean, like, is there a particular number that we're looking for? I mean, $1 million, $500,000. What's the dollar figure that you're looking at?
We have approximately $1 million of space.
Okay, so would we do an estimate then and say, we're looking at this income level and $20,000 or something before we presented it to the board so that it fit within that $1 million?
Yes, but that can't be done by this table. Like, I don't have the data to run that analysis.
No,
right.
Okay, but I just want to, since, I mean, I'm, like I said, angry when I think about it, not living with it all the time chronically, don't worry, but about the way it was done in 2016, want to make sure that we have a reasonable analysis of the cost of that before we present it.
So I think that we have enough information right now to say what the cost limit should be. And it really is, realistically, it's $1 million. I think we have enough information to say that we want the income to be tied to federal AMI. And I think we have enough information to say that we want the housing value to be realistically tied to the 2020 equivalent of what $10,000 was in 1986. We don't know what those numbers are yet because that analysis is required, but those are the boundaries. I think that, and that should probably give us enough to operate in, right?
Okay. And I mean, will you be able to share that analysis with us before the September meeting?
I don't have, when you start talking about income limits, I don't have that. I don't have a way
you mean,
to.
so we're just going to tell the board, we think that you should adjust this and do something like this within these limits and with a maximum cost of $1 million, and don't use whoever you used in 2016.
I start with that bullet and then provide them the other information, but yes.
Okay.
All right, based on that recapitulation of that, shall we try this again? Do I have okay, primary?
Oh, another question. Okay, so we're not going to worry about the quid pro quo, which is fine with me. I just want to make sure, so that's not part of it. We're not going to say give a little something to everybody. So there are some people between 65 and 70 who would end up with just with their pre-S4 exemption.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so yes.
And then the other would be what you have up here with the $10 million limit for people, 100% exemption for people 70 and above.
Yeah, I mean, you could make that the $10 million isn't really a limit. It's just meant to ensure that all homes are included. But yes, so that the second one would be everybody above age 70 would get it.
Okay.
Which in 2019 would have worked out to about 700 of the 1,400 households that received it. So can I get a motion on that one?
Let's if we're going to be really strict, let's be strict. Paula, could you tell us what the first one is again? Ask for the motion, and then we vote, and then tell us the second one, ask the motion, and then we vote, just so we're crisp on it.
I think I can. I will try. So the first one is to handle people 65 to 69 to create a new exemption similar to the GH2 that applies to school tax, not the bond, with a limit of $1 million of cost and with an income limit tied to a two-person household, 100% of AMI for the Atlanta metro area.
And an exemption off the appraised value that is a 2020 equivalent
Okay, right.
to the 1986 $10,000 with an appropriate growth factor.
Yes.
And I would say with the caveat that it does, the cost of that doesn't exceed $1 million.
Yes.
Yes.
I think I threw that in there, but probably not in
Yep.
the correct order.
You did. You said limit of 1 million.
Okay.
On that, can we get, can I
I'll
get?
second it.
Okay, all right. I don't even know who, Hans, were you
I'm
first?
so moved. Yes, I'll
There you
first
go.
it.
All right. Okay. Second by
And then,
Phil.
and then I'll second.
Any further discussion on that one? All right. Then anybody opposed, please say no. All right. The yeas carry. Thank you. And for what it's worth, I actually feel really good about this because I feel like we're making some real progress and we've walked out of a mud soup and the mud is starting to drip off our shoes. So thank you all. The second one is a modification of the S4 for 70 and older, regardless of home value, a 100% exemption for the school tax. Yeah, with a 5-year sunset yet again, in case we need to make more adjustments. Can I get a motion on that one?
So moved.
Very good. Thank you. Any further discussion?
Yeah, actually, one quick thing to point out,
Okay.
and this is relatively important. When you're talking about 100% of people over age 70 and you aren't worried about home value limit, you are going to get a growth in that cost over the next 5 years, right? So the school board needs to understand that this is not going to be flat. This is not like where we were constraining the home values before. This will get expensive in I don't know, it's growing in value, but it is projected definitely to grow. In this case, the $9 million is not a realistic number. I'm comfortable saying that. That is presuming basically that the home values grow at the fastest rate that home values in Decatur have grown in recent years. And that's not a sustainable number. So this is a much more realistic number, but I just want to set that expectation that under the rubric that we're proposing right here, you are going to see this cost grow. It's not going to stay 1.2 for 5 years.
Well, that also brings up yet the other strange question of, we probably have people who are 70 or older and live in $1 million home. And that's one of the other things we were trying to basically correct. So maybe there does need to be a limit of 500, 600,000. Can you change that to just 500,000 and see what it does, Hans?
Oh, it's gonna crush it. I would actually say that this is less about home value here and probably also about income. If somebody in their 70s is making $1 million a year, do we care the home value? We probably, those people can probably afford to pay the school tax. I mean, wouldn't we also add a income AMI adjusted income on that?
You should.
Okay.
Let's do it.
All right. And let's, it's James shared with us several months back the piece of the using Georgia revenue or Georgia income tax net revenue, whatever. Sorry, I'm tired, guys. I apologize. Using Georgia, because Georgia excludes retirement income, that is going to skew toward white or Caucasian folks as opposed to many of our people of color? Do we care about that part?
I thought we thought that just federal AMI, or not AMI, I'm sorry. I thought we thought that just federal income was going to be the easiest.
Okay.
It's comprehensive of everything.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's the one that is most fair.
Federal income should be the standard if you're going to define income in anything.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in that case, and based on the conversation that I had with one of our DeKalb delegation, perhaps it needs to be 120% of AMI, which would be $76,000 at this point, as opposed to it still nets out the people who are making $1 million or 500,000 or whatever. That would certainly handle that.
Well, I think in this case we also say, so if you just take $1 million off of this, we say that this exemption in 2019 numbers should also be constrained to 3.2 million, right? So we constrain the first exemption to 1 million in 2019 numbers. We constrain this one to 3.2 million in 2019 dollars. And then it's going to grow at the rates that we give it the optionality to grow, but it's not on us to run that analysis. It's just that we've put the recommendation for the limits forward for the school to do. Does that make sense? I'm sorry if I was all over the place on that.
I'm lost on that one, but it's all right.
So what we're saying is in 2019, the total value of the S4 should be $4.2 million.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
We know 1 million of that is the 65
right
to 69. So that means the net of that, the 3.2 remaining, should be for the 70 and above. And so we can put forward to the school, here are the parameters, right? At 70 and above, this is the income the federal income that's tied to it. And it has to fit in 2019 dollars into a $3.2 million bucket. And so you pick the federal income based on what gets you into that $3.2 million bucket. I can tell you right now, that's going to be a really high income. I mean, that it's going to get most people into that bucket. So I don't think we're particularly constraining it, but just to make sure that we aren't at $8 million in 3 years, we ought to make sure that we're, pretty tightly, we need to be clear about what those constraints are in 2019.
How do we know that the buckets of 1 million and the other one are the right buckets in the right categories?
Great question.
Without demographics.
Great question. So here we go. If we do the 10 million. So this is now encompassing all homes in Decatur. Nobody 65 is getting it. 100% of the people 70 and above are getting it. That's the $3.2 million cost that it would have. And so we're saying, hold that at that level. The other way to look at it is when we grew it from the number that it was in 2016, without adding the S4, we have a total of $3 million baseline cost. When we add the 1.2 million that they wanted to have in it, you had a total of 4.2 million, right? So if you look at the 3.2 million that we said the 70 and above was, that means that we have $1 million of space that we can add for those that are 65.
Okay.
And we have $3.2 million worth of space left for those that are 70 and above. But that's only in 2019. And so whatever federal adjusted income and whatever other kind of constraints they want to put around it, those calculations need to hold it to 3.2 in 2019 dollars. And then in future years, it's going to do what it does. And you sunset it in 5 years if something grows differently than you anticipate. Does that make sense, y'all? I know this is, I've lived in this model for a couple of weeks. And so it's like, I forget what I don't, like you looking at it the first time, this is a pain in the ass. And I understand that. Does that make sense? Because that's kind of an important breakdown of what we're talking about.
I follow the numbers the way you just explained, but I'm not sure that the numbers in the context of this spreadsheet answer the question of what the actual demographics are for the people who live in those homes. If they're in that, how many are in the 62, 69? How many are in the 70s? And where will they be in subsequent in the years coming?
In the years coming, it's a little harder to say. What I can say is right now, in 2019, if you did it the way that I was describing, 3.2 for the 70 and above and 1 million for the 65 and above, you'll be impacting about half of these homes get the full exemption. And then I don't know, and I can't know from the data set that I have how many in the 65 to 69 group get the exemption. But it'd be a fair bit. I mean, I guess the other thing we could do is this is going to blow my model up. Yeah. So let's turn this number into 1 million.
One thing I'm kind of wondering about though is if what we're talking about wanting to do for people in the 65 to 69 age group costs more than $1 million to be meaningful. You know, do we need to leave some wiggle room for the 70 and up crowd? Or do we need to do something maybe less for the 70 and up crowd than a 100% exemption, so that there is wiggle room to do something that costs more than $1 million for the 65 to 79 lower income crowd?
Yeah, it's a good question. My intuition, having been inside of this model, is that you've got a lot of space in here, right? And so the numbers that I just ran really quickly to answer Phil's question is basically a third of the people, if all things were equal, meaning that we were just doing an average across the entire population of people that were 65 to 69, they would be getting about 35% of the exemption that they are currently getting today, right? So all of them, all 800 or so, 700 to 800, you know, all about 700 homes would be getting a third of the current exemption that they're getting today. Instead, what we are saying is we're going to put an income limit and a home limit on this that are going to take a fair number of the people out and ensure that 35% is actually much higher concentrated amongst the individuals that need it. And so I actually think that we have the space in there to hit quite a bit, basically all of the individuals that really need it. It's a fair bit of wiggle room once we start constraining it. But no, I mean, now I'm talking myself out of it as I talk about it, Gwen, because the point's still a well-made one, in that we don't know from these numbers exactly how that's going to end up being distributed.
And is there any wiggle room? Is there any wiggle room? If depending on how where the need is to make.
Well, what we're saying with the 65 is that the wiggle room in the $1 million is to say what's the income and the home value limit that we assign to that exemption, right? So if we say in the 65 and up exemption, we say basically $1 million a year in income and $1.5 million home value, then you can be sure that it's going to get distributed to the wrong people. It's going to get kind of evenly spread amongst everybody. If instead you say we're going to limit the income to, you know, $60,000 and under, and a home value of, you know, $400,000 and less, like you could start playing with those two factors to try to get it to the group of people that need it the most. What I can say with 100% surety is it's still going to be a whole lot more than what those individuals were getting under the previous exemption rubric. There's just way more money in that bucket.
Okay.
But Gwen, you're now, I mean, you managed to let me talk myself out of it and say we probably do actually need to run the analysis to find out exactly what that is. But we can't run that analysis. The school needs to run that analysis. Like that, once we start talking about age and income, once we start talking about income specifically, it gets very difficult we can't do it with this data set.
Well, then would the proposal then be, I guess, to kind of keep what we already approved for the other one, except for maybe change I mean, if there's a certain income parameter that we want, like you mentioned 120%, right?
Right.
Or the first one that we talked about, then maybe, we go with that and we state it. And so whatever it takes, and then you adjust that $10,000 to something more meaningful in today's terms, right? So figure out the cost of that. And then within this $4.2 million threshold, whatever amount you have left, give a homestead exemption in some amount to the people who are at least 70. And that amount should exceed whatever or maybe you make it, here's a thought. So for the people who are aged, 65 to 69, just say that's for 65 and up. And you've got your 120% and you've got your $10,000 assessed, $10,000 reduction in assessed value adjusted for what, to 2019 numbers. You figure out the cost of that, and then whatever is left from the $4.2 million, you give a homestead exemption for people who are 70 or more, and you could at that point say if it's 100% or 75% or 50%, whatever that is.
Yeah.
But then the people who are 70 could still take the one that you've set in place for the people who are 65 and over if they met those income qualifications. So
Yes.
they could kind of get the benefit of both. I mean, that way you wouldn't have somebody who is shut out of the one who was worse off under the one for people who are 70 and above than for people who are 65 and above. I might be overcomplicating thinking that, but it might. What do we need to get that calculation? Who needs to do that calculation?
I mean, James, is that the kind of thing that you could have the folks that put that Tableau tool together do? They did.
I'm unsure. I'm sure we could do it before we would vote on anything. How about that?
I do think that's a little bit. I mean, I don't want to be callous about this, but I do think that the specifics of that analysis are a little bit of a not our problem.
Yeah.
What I think what I like about what Gwen is saying, and Gwen, I appreciate the thoroughness of what you're saying, but I also think just knowing what the numbers are and the number of homes, I don't think we're going to run into that scenario. I mean, I think we're going to be able to hit everybody in the 65 to 69 group that needs it and still have enough for 100% bucket left over for 70 and above. But I do very much like the way of saying, what we need to do is put a stake in the ground and say, this is who we're protecting. We are protecting 65 to 69 folks that have income challenges in Decatur, and we are going to protect them with an equitable exemption that is meaningful and substantive. Whatever is left over after that is 100% given to those that are 70 and above, and that it can be up to 100% of whatever your school tax bill is. And if it's 89.3%, then it's that number, right? But we fixed it for those that are 65 to 69, and then everything that is left is 70 and above. What I can promise is that whatever is left, 70 and above, is going to be the giant portion of that bucket. And it's going to be much more than the 65 to 69. But that's under today's house values and today's standard income and so I think your point of putting the parameters in there extremely well defined is critical, so that you don't end up in a situation where somebody gets a benefit at 65 and then loses it at 70 because we didn't think through how to ensure that they were protected through.
Paula, will you be able to do like you did, how many meetings ago? You had the ML, kind of had like a map indicator, and you showed the coverage of what that would look like.
Yes, if Hans.
I'm guessing that it's gonna look a lot like where we saw the heavier groupings of people with lower home values, just so that we know. It's like literally a check for me visually.
Yes, if Hans will share with me
Sounds like
addresses, then I can definitely map that. I don't know how different it's going to be.
I think
Gathering, you're asking.
Possible? Is it possible?
Well, you got to carve out the 65 group, 65 to 69, away from the 70s. That's the only thing I didn't do last time was I didn't do it by age. So Hans,
Okay.
if you could just pull 2019 and give me all the 70-year-olds and older, then the addresses, and I can certainly map that.
Okay. And I don't want to do a, can't you?
Actually,
digging.
I hate to say this, I can't do that.
Okay.
Because what happens, well, you know, I'm not going to get into the nuance of it. The 70 and above.
Yes, you are.
The 70 and above was based upon who was receiving the 70 and above exemption in 2016, grown to 2019. Because in reality, it fell off a cliff because everybody just took the S4. So
Right.
I had to make that estimate. What I could do is we could go back to the 2016 numbers and just say it's probably not a larger portion of people in 2019 than it was in 2016. It's this set or smaller.
So if you took
All right. Sorry. Go ahead.
if you took the 2019 digest only and you separate out all the people who are taking, oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, that it's modeled. Like the last data set that I know who's over 70 actually
2016.
is 2016.
Okay.
I modeled that into 2019.
Okay.
This would be so much easier if we just collected demographic data from the people that pay taxes. It would be great. Gwen, are we allowed to do that?
Like demographic data from
Taxpayers? I mean, we know their names, addresses. Like, it would be awesome to know their age so we could do this so much more easily.
I
Can we
mean,
just get a data
the federal
dump from the
government's
census?
doing the census, which by the way, plug, if you have not filled out your census information yet, please do so.
Hurry
It's
up.
very, very important.
Just
But-
FYI, we're launching a campaign with Beacon Hill to do one text, one email, one social media. It takes 12 minutes to 10 minutes for doing your census and 2 minutes to register to vote. So we'll be sending
That's
that out
awesome.
on one.
Where does the
Just
my worry is that the responsiveness of the census is going to favor the wealthier households, right? And
and that's
Yes.
and right now they're saying, according to the organization Fair Count, at this point they've only covered 60% of the households, and there's a movement by the federal government to curtail the follow-up effort, which is going to people's doors for those who have not responded.
Yep.
And they're curtailing that. They're going to end that by September 30th in order to get the results and do the congressional allocation before the new administration comes in, hopefully on January 2021.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of potential shenanigans going on around this census, and just stay tuned. And if you get the information, encourage your neighbors, friends, family, make sure that they're counted.
So the long and short of that is that even the census data may be not the best source
Right.
for us to try to find the demographic information of the individuals that actually need the most.
Well, does the ARC is fairly accurate. They wouldn't have like information on every household, right? But
You know, I wonder, let me, I can ask a couple questions. Well, I mean, I think we all know Mike Alexander. I can reach out to him and see if he could point me in the right direction on that. That might be helpful, because just getting an age, ideally age and income, but that's a lot to ask for. I think if we can get those pieces of data tied to some of the properties, I think that would be very helpful. That's a good call, Marie. I didn't think about that, but the ARC is probably our best bet. The long and short of it, though, is we still need to be pretty clearly defined, to Gwen's point, around what are the parameters that we're putting forward. And then from there, you know, the school can do the analysis on how it's broken out between the two buckets.
Okay. We're at the 2+ hour mark. I would like email chain with public participation ideas. Is that okay, Paula, with you?
Can you give me one more sentence on that one?
Just the last thing that was on the agenda is
Right. I got that part. I'm just asking for a little further explanation of what you meant by that.
how would you all like for this information, this discussion, what we're considering, to be disseminated to the public? So far, I have in my notes from the previous one that Phil would like there to be a town hall meeting, a presentation of this. We could do it after the September, when we provide some feedback about what you all have considered and some of your data and stuff like that. If there's anything else that needs to be, you know, considered, or anything else like that, any other ideas for public participation, you know, let us know. That kind of seems like a, here are some things we're thinking about sort of thing.
So I totally agree that there needs to be some kind of presentation that is made to the public, that is also recorded, so that people can't participate at that given moment, that they can go back and access it, and then have a way for them to ask questions, make comments. We need to be very clear on what we're talking about, and how, and then give some examples of, if you are 65 and this is your income and this is your home, but whatever, right? It needs to be very, very clear that these are proposals, these are not final, but that we need to make it relatable for people, because if it's not relatable, it's just going to be a bloodbath, and we don't want that.
Okay.
I just want to say, I think that as I don't know, maybe this is just my own personal preference, is to talk less about how we got here than the practical application of what we're suggesting and what it is going to mean to somebody.
Thoroughly agree. Like,
I don't think any of us want to have to explain what all we went through to just to
sorry. Show your work. It's like, oh.
I do think this is the charge. These were the numbers. This is the outcome, and then here's an example of how it affects you. Here's an example of how it affects you. Here's an example. Like, I do think, 3 minutes of explanation, and then everything else, like literally the rest of the hour or whatever it is, examples of different scenarios for people, right? So it can be, a lot of our objective was to protect those that needed it, like what was the mission statement, that sort of a thing. None of this crap that's here on the screen would go up. You know what I mean? Like, this just wouldn't be a part of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
James, can you just I'm totally new, and from a standpoint of protocol? Has this been done before? Do we need the board awareness and approval, or how does that work?
So far I've just been reporting back on what my minutes have been happening, what's been going on. We're expecting sort of a presentation from you all with September. The last time we met and discussed the charge was February. So it was in person and everything was great. We were going to have a couple of summer meetings in public, and everything's kind of gone crazy. But the closest analogy I have to it, Phil, was when I was not on the board, when we went through a realignment of the schools, where there was sort of some public presentations of, these are the options that we're considering. We will take your questions. These are why we're considering them, and then take that information after you all presented it, make sure it's very clear. Thank you for all of the feedback. And then we'll say, okay, well, this is what we're voting on. And then, as Mayor Bill was very clear on, it then has to go through the other steps. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Okay. So it's not totally uncharted waters. It's been done before.
Creating committees to make suggestions that we then use to bring to the public, because I think that that's why senior tax exemptions exist, right? Is to help the public, and the charge is about equity and maintaining seniors being able to live in place, but also, whether it worked or not, the right type of seniors continue to be able to afford their homes indicator, I think is one of the purposes of it.
Don't overlook the fact that this is the first time that you're probably substantively taking away from people something that they, you know what I mean? This isn't the same thing as saying we're giving you one. This is we're taking it away. My experience in this, so I was at the City of Atlanta when we redid all of the pensions, and absolutely took away I mean, the city was basically going bankrupt, so there wasn't an option. Yeah. The way, I would recommend, not that I'm necessarily volunteering for this, but if it's one of us that's presenting it, as opposed to the school board or the superintendent, we are a buffer for the anger that the audience will have, right? Because they're not necessarily angry at us. We're given an impossible task. And so we could stand up there and be like, I agree with you. It was stupid the school board did this, but look where we are, right? So in some ways we can actually be a little bit on the audience's side and take some of that sting out of the room. If the superintendent is up there, that's where the anger will come out, and that's where the people will go after him, and it's not necessarily a productive conversation at that point. It's a venting conversation, right? Whereas this could be I get your anger, and like I'm not happy that we have to make these recommendations either. But given that our charge was to do it, we just want to be clear on how we thought through how to answer an impossible question. And so we're not quite as directly attackable.
I don't know. I think people in Decatur are going to attack you anyway, no matter what your position is.
I agree, but I get to be like, yeah, they were dumb for doing it. You know what I mean? I get to also throw some shade at the school board, right? Like, that's the difference.
Are we going to need a Zoom sergeant of arms?
Yeah.
Probably. I do think it's going to be critically important to be able to explain what we would have done in 2019 if we had $2 million more in our budget. What are some things that we just could not afford? I mean, and some things we cut parapros for kindergarten a few years ago. We reduced Spanish from 4 days a week to 3 days a week in the lower elementary schools. I mean, my kids are elementary, so that's why I think about those things. But I think it's really important to say these are cuts that we've had to make.
Yeah, we can work on
this happened, and spell out, this is why we cannot afford this and have to do something different, not just because we're greedy and we want more money to have more central office staff or whatever.
And then
they're bad.
There certainly should be people in the audience supportive of those programs coming back.
Yes.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well, and that's going to be interesting because realistically, I would expect the vast majority of people who are going to be interested in this discussion are at least 60 years old. And I don't know how many of those have children in the system at this point. So there's going to have to be some level of, I don't even know what that looks like, but recruitment of people who care about those particular things being.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So
You're definitely going to have to, you have to beef up the allies because the people throwing bricks are going to be plentiful.
Not, let's be clear, not to the extent that the Braves did when they slammed the stadium through in Cobb County and had it stuffed with, right? So like what we're looking for here is a balance, right? This is a community discussion. There are stakeholders on all sides of this conversation. Everyone's voice should be heard in this discussion. And so it's not, we're not artificially stacking it and leaning it our way, but we are making sure that at least all values are not values, all viewpoints are represented in that conversation, because that's going to be important.
I don't know how many parents, and Gwen and James, you can answer this question. How many parents know that those academic cuts were this? You know what I mean?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
That's okay. I don't know how many parents, I've never had parents talk about it in my circles. How many parents are aware that those cuts to their children's academic menu were due to that overage?
I don't know that they actually were necessarily ever attributed to the Homestead exemption. I mean, it's kind of a conclusion that I drew because I was against the Homestead exemption to start with. But so, I mean, I think you can just kind of point it out as, you know, since this was enacted, we've had to cut X, Y, Z. I don't think many people have really thought about it together unless I have made them think about it that way. Like,
just be
it wasn't posted
aware
on Facebook, so they definitely haven't thought about it.
But be aware that if you draw that linkage, you are more or less committing to deploy those funds to bring those programs back. Like, there are political ramifications.
Well, and that's why you might want to think about instead, you here are things that the school district wants to do but can't.
Yes, that's a great way to frame it.
Programs that we would implement right now that we wish.
That's what I wanted to know, like, what is knowledgeable, and we can control the framework and the conversation on it.
Yes.
I apologize, folks. I am running out of children time, and so have to engage on.
No, we should all go.
Okay, so the next board meeting is September 8th, just so everyone knows. It will be virtual, and they're going to move back to the regular time of 6:30, I believe.
Yes.
There's a board meeting next week, August 11th, but the September board meeting is September 8th.
Thank you. I'm sorry. It's horrible to try to figure out how to not interrupt people. It's I'm looking on the screen. I'm like, who's okay? I apologize. I would like for us to get back together one more time before we get close to September 8th. So can we do something? Hines, I don't even know where we left you with what are we going to change in the model you already had, but
my first request from you is to be a homework list. Like there's some volunteering that happened by accident there, and so I want to make sure I know what I signed up for.
Don't worry, it's okay. I actually, if Sean, if you'll share the recording of this with me later, then I'll go back and pick up all the homework that we voluntold poor Hans about. But I want us to get very clear on these two pieces that we're talking about, and to feel good that the numbers are there and that we can explain this in a way that makes good sense. And we are eliminating the $1 million homes. We are taking care of the people that we said from the beginning we needed to take care of. The school system is getting enough to be able to maintain and possibly add some things back into the budget. And people, overall, the community is being taken care of. That there are folks who are, I mean, it's very simple. There are people taking this exemption right now who clearly pay the taxes. So I just want us to be very clear before we get before we start even thinking about putting a presentation together, I want to be very clear on those 2 exemptions and what kind of impact they have. As clear as we can be. So Heinz, if you've got somebody at ERC that you can ask about the income part, if we can make any kind of, I don't want to overcomplicate your life. I do not. I really don't. I don't. I think we've actually come to some really good stuff today that I feel like we could put in front of the DeKalb delegation and they wouldn't throw it back in our face. All right. So that's a plus. Trying to find those, just fine tuning the levers so that we feel good about putting this out and saying, okay, now we can explain it. We can explain how it will affect people, and we can explain how it will affect the school system and our community. So, Sean, I don't know if you need, maybe, do we need to do a doodle poll again? And
we can all, if possible, we can all look at August 19th. Would that be good? It's a Wednesday.
May not be enough time.
Okay, how much time do you, the 26th maybe? It's a Wednesday.
Well, let me, I think if it's taking more time than August 19th, then we've bitten off more than we're saying we should chew. I think right now what we're saying is we've more or less finished the amount of analysis that we're going to do. We're going to put some parameters forward. We are not going to put forward the final analysis that the school needs to do. We're going to do our best to, thumb in the air and give you a sense of where we are. But ultimately, we're going to put the requirements for those different things, the different exemptions together. And the onus is really going to be on you to get that analysis done. And so I think what we're looking for our next meeting, maybe by the 19th, if everybody's amenable, is more, what is the storyline and how are we going to tell this? Not necessarily more pull a lever here or pull a lever there. Like, what is the storyline? And that, I think, if we're needing more than 2 weeks for, then it means we don't have it really clear in our head right now.
Right.
Then if the 19th works for everybody, and you all think you can pull it together, we could do the 19th, but it will have to work for everyone so that you all can come together and get your recommendations all cleared up and.
Right.
Just so that I'm clear on how I'm thinking about it, by the 19th, we would have a very, very ugly and incorrect rough draft of what the storyline is. And the point of the meeting on the 19th is to beat the crap out of it so that it looks in the shape that we want, right? Yeah.
Can we try to agree that this should probably be something in the order of 3 to 5 slides?
Yes. Well, yeah, 3, like I would say relatively shorter slide, like fewer slides for that, with the, like this is going to be the impact on everybody not done yet. Like that part, like this is what it's going to happen to somebody at this, all those different
Scenarios.
Pieces. This is more the, how do we get everybody to be willing to listen to those this is how it impacts you. Yeah.
Now, to put it together, could you all use Google and everybody can, someone can start something and everybody can start putting in their thoughts in the document? And even as far as the slide goes, somebody can draw that out and I can help you all put that together. Or if you all want to just do it yourselves, that's fine, but I'm here to help you. But we could start a Google Doc, put everybody on it, and everybody can start filling in their thoughts. Someone can start it and then just tweaking it a little bit. And that way you don't have a lot of emails going back and forth. Everybody's working in the same document and we can get this done, get it moving.
Yes, I thank you for that. I think that if we use Google kind of like our whiteboard, right?
Yeah.
Use a Google presentation or something and just start getting these ideas down and then to start to pull the rest of it together. Thank you. If you want to create one, great, I'm happy to do it. I think you have got a better finger on the pulse of everybody's email address, so it's probably better if you can do the invitation.
Okay.
Sean, if you don't mind.
I don't mind. And then as far as laying it out, do you have like a a table of contents, just to break a short item 1, item 2, how you all would like that broken out.
I think that's what we're going to have to work on, actually, is
Yeah.
start to tell the story, and for each of us to kind of go, oh, well, you got to put this part in there before you
Yeah.
do that kind of thing.
Okay.
James, can you get somebody from CSD to give us, you know, some information about if you had $1 million or $2 million more in the budget, what you'd be doing with it right now? You know, what are some things that you can't fund right now that you wish you could?
Sure.
I mean, there's got to be a nice list. People are always asking for stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And our new executive director of finance is Lanita Broom. And she would be a good person for James to talk with.
Do you
Well, I mean, we
guys
just-
have, go ahead, James, sorry.
Yeah, we have that is very easy to do, Gwen. I mean, we as a budget process, we went through and had every administrator, instructional coach, and the athletic director say, what's your wish list? So
It has to
actually
fit
right-
within a couple $1 million.
It's right.
Like,
it's right there. So that's easy to do.
So I am happy to take a first stab at like slide title outline, kind of like put the storyline together, and we can start throwing ideas onto the slides. Shauna, if you can put the Google Slides doc up and invite us all in it, and if there's a template that's, you know, CSD or the board prefers, put that up as well. And then we could start putting placeholders for stuff like the data from James or the parameters of the exemptions that Paula, you've got all of that. You just, you know, and that way at least we'll have, you know, like Phil's 5 slides or so outline, and when we can like that should be. Do you mind doing that,
I don't
Jenna?
mind.
Great. All right. And
I'll have that for you all tomorrow morning.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you.
And then I'll get cranking on putting some structure on it, and then we just go to town.
Okay. So would you all like a spread, Google Doc and a Google PowerPoint both?
I prefer to work in slides if we're starting it as slides, right? I think that's the
Then we'll
easier
do
thing
slides.
to do. Yeah.
Okay, I'll put some slides together.
I agree with
We'll
that.
make them ugly at first, and then we'll clean them up. It'll be okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
and I
how
can
it
help
always
with
works.
that if you need my help.
So we're not going to do, just to clarify, we're going to have slides and not like a one-pager kind of thing to go with them, just slides.
Well, don't we? It's a good question, Gwen. I would think what we want is the slides for the public presentation, and then one of our ultimate deliverables is not a one pager, but like a several pager report readout, right? But I think that several page readout is much better improved if we first do the discipline of mushing what we want to say into like a couple slide storyline, right? Like if we can tell the story in a couple slides, then we can write the report in a compelling way. Whereas I don't think it translates the other way. If you write a report, the slides look like crap. But please shoot me down if anybody disagrees.
I think it's much easier to tell the story first and then go put the fact sheet together, basically. And having Maria and I'm sure still, our heads are still spinning a little bit from the affordable housing or you too, Hans, from the affordable housing task force work that I don't think they're expecting anything quite like that, but I do think that I think we owe the school. What's that?
I said I hope not. Jesus,
I hope not, right?
I am de-volunteering myself to write that right now. I'm just letting you all know.
But I don't think it's going to take that much to tell this story. I really don't. I think that we need to be very careful about the balance that of community interest, of all the things we talked about all night. I'm so sorry, but the idea is that CSD can't have everything they want, but we do need to kind of help correct this ship a little bit. So without hurting people we don't mean to hurt.
So I really do need to step off, y'all. I know
Okay.
I said I did, but I
We all do.
I'm
All
gonna
right,
say
so-
thank you.
Close.
I
Bye,
really
everyone.
appreciate all of you, your time, your brain power, all that good stuff. Thank you for what I think is possibly the most productive meeting we've had in this whole thing. So I am I'm quite grateful to all of you, and thank you for being here, and we will take it from there. And Shauna, if you'll send that a meeting invitation for the 19th, that would be awesome. We will go with whatever we have at that moment, and more progress.
Okay.
Kudos to Sarah for sticking through this whole thing with us.
Right.
Anyway,
She's not
heroes
there.
work.
No.
Yeah. All right.
All
Bye,
right.
everybody.
Thanks so much.
Have a good night.
See ya.